Hello, I'm Esther Gidu. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump threatens massive tariffs, especially on China, as countries around the world brace for possible economic upheaval. Marco Rubio, a Florida Republican, is President-elect Donald Trump's choice for U.S. Secretary of State. And as Kenyans suffer through tough times, President William Ruto is under pressure to improve the country's economy and healthcare system. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. Countries worldwide are bracing for economic upheaval as U.S. President-elect Donald Trump threatens massive tariffs, especially on China. The uncertainty has governments and businesses struggling with how to respond. VOA's Bill Gallo reports from Seoul, South Korea.
During his first term, Donald Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on China, shaking the global economy. Ahead of his return, Trump is vowing even more drastic measures. 10% tariffs on all imports to the U.S. and a staggering 60% on goods from China. While China hasn't commented directly on Trump's threats, it has warned against further trade tensions.
We don't answer hypothetical questions, but let me just reiterate that there's no winner in a trade war, nor will the world benefit from it.
Any Trump tariffs could especially hurt economies that depend on exports. But an expanded U.S.-China trade war could also create opportunities. Many countries have benefited as production shifts away from China to avoid tariffs. Thailand's commerce minister recently told VOA's Thai service his country has seen an influx of U.S. companies relocating factories from China.
We should be able to weather this. I actually see these problems as benefits for Thailand. I believe that we can be an investment destination for every country.
That approach comes with risks, though. Many countries that gained from trade moving out of China now heavily rely on exporting to the United States, leaving them even more vulnerable to any blanket Trump tariffs or efforts to crack down on rerouted goods. The concerns stretch beyond the biggest U.S. trading partners. In Africa, where trade with the U.S. is already limited, higher tariffs could make access even harder, one analyst told VOA's Africa 54.
If we talk about manufacturing, if we're talking about production of produce, pineapples, and coming to the U.S. market, it's going to be difficult. So I'm not optimistic about U.S. trade with Africa if we're talking about increasing tariffs.
Much of the uncertainty stems from Trump's unpredictability. During his first term, he often used the prospect of tariffs as a bargaining tool before eventually striking individual trade deals, says analyst Jayant Menon.
Trump is not a protectionist, I think, right? He's a deal maker. That's what he, likes to present himself as, the art of the deal and all that. So he likes free trade agreements that he has a role in.
Menon says countries targeted by Trump could push for new trade agreements instead of tit-for-tat tariff escalations that could harm themselves and the global economy. Not all of Trump's proposals point toward increased protectionism. He's also suggested rolling back subsidies for U.S.-made electric vehicles, subsidies put in place by the Biden administration.
He's already called them, silly in a podcast with Joe Rogan. So he's probably going to roll them back. And that's a positive, right, in terms of the distortions that affect the global economy.
Both risks and opportunities as the world figures out how to respond to the return of an unpredictable U.S. president. Bill Gallo, VOA News, Seoul, South Korea.
President-elect Donald Trump's choice to serve as the next U.S. Secretary of State is Marco Rubio, a Florida Republican who has been in the Senate since 2011 and serves on the Chamber's Foreign Relations and Intelligence Committees. VOA's chief national correspondent Steve Harmon has more.
53-year-old Marco Rubio is the son of working-class Cuban immigrants. If he is confirmed by his Senate colleagues, he would become the first Latino Secretary of State. Rubio has exhibited a tough stance toward authoritarian regimes in Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, as well as China.
Call him a hawk, if you will, and it really is across a number of issues, certainly China among them.
Rubio has said China is partnering with Iran, North Korea, and Russia against the United States. After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Rubio was a vocal supporter of Kiev. More recently, he has called for negotiations to end the conflict and voted in April against a $95 billion military aid package.
And so I believe our goal when it comes to Ukraine is to be helpful to Ukraine in a way that doesn't drain us, in a way that doesn't harm our alliances around the world.
Rubio's fellow senators who would vote on his confirmation are expected to examine his beliefs on U.S. policy towards the country, O'Hanlon says.
Certainly if we were to abandon Ukraine, not that Rubio is implying we should, but if we were to watch Ukraine suffer a defeat, that would make a lot of allies around the world wonder if we would be really behind them, if we would have their back.
Rubio was one of Donald Trump's rivals in the Republican presidential primary 8 years ago. As Secretary of State, he would be the key diplomat, implementing Trump's America First foreign policy.
Whatever the expectations, we must be realistic. The United States will prioritize its interests over those of the rest of the world.
When it comes to the Middle East, Rubio has been a strong supporter of Israel, in line with Trump's stance. As a senator, Rubio has called for Israel to eradicate Hamas in Gaza, opposing ceasefires that he says would allow the U.S.-designated terrorist organization to regroup. Steve Herman, VOA News, at the State Department.
The presidential recess appointment process is often misunderstood. VOA's Philip Alexiou talks with James Wallner, senior fellow with the R Street Institute in Washington, about the process and if it's possible for a president to circumvent it if he really wants a particular selection to go forth.
There's a process that plays out. That process informs senators as it unfolds, and ultimately it will dictate whether someone gets confirmed or doesn't get confirmed. And so that's a really important consideration. The other thing to keep in mind is that the Constitution, its appointments clause, requires get Senate confirmation of any person that he puts on the federal bench as a federal judge or an officer of the United States, an executive branch official. This is the advise and consent power of the Senate. And the Senate has the ability to exercise this power independently. It doesn't have to confirm the president's nominees. It doesn't even have to defer to those nominees or even give the president a vote on those nominees, because after all, that's the separation of powers. When the Constitution was written, though, there were periods of time where the Senate was gone from Washington, D.C. for months on end, months on end. And so the idea was that the president ought to be able to put someone in a position where you need a government official or a federal judge so that the government can continue functioning until the Senate returns. And so that's called a recess appointment. And these recess appointments aren't designed to do an end run around the Senate's advice and consent power, but rather a supplement to that power to allow the government to continue functioning when the Senate's not in session.
So, but if something doesn't go the president's way, and let's just, for the sake of it, say that he really wants to push somebody forward and the Senate doesn't want it to go forward, is there something that the president can do or the Speaker of the House can do to create some avenue where there could be a recess, a short recess of at least 10 days or more, so that then the president could then push through the person he wants?
No, there's not. And I think we don't have to be experts to see why. I mean, it's just common sense. The separation of powers says that no one is in charge. No one rules America. No one gets to tell each branch, other than the people themselves, how to exercise their powers under the Constitution. The Senate gets to decide for itself how it will exercise its powers, just like the president gets to decide how the president will exercise his powers and the House their powers. And the Senate has the power to decide when it wants to adjourn. The Constitution is very specific and says it has to get the House's permission if it wants to adjourn for more than 3 days, and to kind of pave the way for a recess of sufficient length to make a recess appointment. But the president can't forcibly adjourn Congress. That would be like the King of Great Britain dissolving Parliament because he doesn't like what the Parliament's about to do. And that is something that is completely antithetical to the Constitution's separation of powers doctrine. And at the end of the day, yes, the president has the power, if the House and Senate disagree on how long to adjourn for, the president can, on extraordinary occasions, in the Constitution, it says extraordinary occasions, adjourn the House and Senate when they can't agree, when they are in a case of disagreement. But that's a very specific term. And the Senate has to take action to decide that it wants to disagree. And until it takes action, then it's not in a state of disagreement with the House.
And so recess appointments happen all the time, right? I mean, they happen under every president. They may push to 100, like Bill Clinton did, about 139, George W., 171, Obama, 32, and so on. But these are appointments that are not high-level cabinets, and are these the ones that, what are those recess appointments for people to understand? Those particular
recess appointments have been used throughout American history for almost every single position, including justices of the Supreme Court. They're in and of themselves, they're not controversial. I think what makes this controversial is when you do an in run, when you use the recess appointment to do an in run around the Senate. One of the reasons why the recess appointments dropped off with President Obama is because President Obama used the recess appointment power to appoint the commissioners to the National Labor Relations Board. I mean, that's an obscure board, the National Labor Relations Board. And the Senate didn't like that. They said we weren't in a recess. And so they started doing what we call pro forma sessions to prevent President Obama from making other recess appointments. And that's where we've been ever since. And so the Senate can decide when and how it wants to limit the president's ability to conduct recess appointments. And again, it's not the recess appointment. It is the reason why. And we all know that the Senate has to confirm just, otherwise the president would have complete and unfettered control of the executive branch, and there'd be no way for the Congress to prevent the president from using the executive branch to encroach on their powers. This is the whole notion of checks and balances.
That was James Wolner, Senior Fellow at the R Street Institute, talking to VOA's Philip Alexiou. Experts say poverty and hunger are major factors in the global migration crisis. On the sidelines of the recently held G20 summit in Brazil, they said that putting in place effective social safety nets can help mitigate the root causes that compel people to leave their homes. VOA's immigration reporter Elaine Barrows reports from Rio de Janeiro.
Steve Said was a political science student in Haiti. He left in 2023 because there were no jobs there. Security was a concern. The 22-year-old says he needed to try for a better life.
Because the situation there is difficult. I chose Brazil because I heard of work opportunities and how welcoming Brazilian people are.
To get to Brazil, he crossed without documentation into the Dominican Republic. He says it was dangerous and expensive.
The first time I did not get in, but I went back to the border.
Said spent a month in the Dominican Republic. He worked and saved money. After a month, he got a humanitarian visa and now lives in Brazil seeking economic stability.
In life, you can't stop. If you need to get somewhere, you have to fight until the end.
According to the Brazilian Federal Police, about 164,000 Haitians live in the country. And as Brazil hosts leaders from the world's 20 largest economies at their summit in Rio de Janeiro, experts say G20 countries need to have ready the resources to integrate migrants into their new homes.
That must always be addressed from a human rights perspective. Additionally, G20 leaders should acknowledge that migration also occurs due to structural issues such as poverty, environmental disasters, wars, and conflicts.
In its declaration, the G20 agreed it is important to prevent irregular migration and respond to the root causes of displacement, such as hunger and poverty. Wellington Dias, Brazil's development minister, says 2.4 billion people worldwide live in poverty.
But beyond the migration issue, I always argue that hunger and poverty are not just problems for those who are hungry or living in poverty. It is a problem for middle class, for the wealthy, for rich countries, and for wealthy individuals.
Gia says people in desperate need might turn to crime, creating problems for everyone. So a key initiative at the summit is the creation of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. The alliance aims to provide cash transfers for 500 million people and school meals for 150 million children. More than 80 countries, 24 international organizations, 9 international financial institutions, and 31 philanthropies have joined so far.
It is no longer just giving food baskets. We are talking about implementing a development plan that must address education, which is a key foundation for eradicating poverty, as well as health, the economy, job creation, and infrastructure.
According to the United Nations, the relationship between food insecurity, migration, and displacement is heavily influenced by climate change, natural disasters, conflicts, and poverty, the major themes during Brazil's G20 summit. Aline Barros, VOA News, Rio de Janeiro.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, Kenya's president is under pressure to improve the country's economy and healthcare system. We'll be right back.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture. You are watching Africa 54 from the Voice of America headquarters here in Washington, D.C. In other news, at least 22 Somalis are dead after 2 migrant boats capsized off the coast of Madagascar over the weekend, according to the Somali information minister.
Madagascar's Port, Maritime and River Authority says the boats had departed from Somalia for the French Indian Ocean territory of Mayotte on November 2nd, a voyage of several hundred kilometers. Namibia's Vice President, Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, could become the country's first female president if she wins the presidential election on Wednesday. At least 1.4 million people, about half of the population, are registered to vote in the elections, with 15 political parties running for president and seats in the National Assembly. And South African writer and poet Brighton Breitenbach, a staunch opponent of the former white minority government's apartheid policy of racial oppression, has died in Paris, his family announced on Sunday. He was 85. Breitenbach was a celebrated wordsmith, a leading voice in literature in Afrikaans, an offshoot of Dutch that was developed by white settlers. Kenya's government is facing multiple challenges, from economic woes to a healthcare crisis. President William Ruto is under pressure from major Christian denominations, accusing his administration of poor leadership that has worsened the lives of citizens. I spoke to Macharia Munene, a professor of history and international relations at the U.S. International University in Nairobi, about the issues plaguing the country, including a church rejecting a sizable donation from Ruto.
And the people all over the country are very unhappy with what's going on. And the donation that the president made came immediately after the Catholic bishops, collectively 28 of them or so, issued a very stern statement about what's wrong in the country, the lies, the corruption and all those things. So he was kind of trying to recover by saying, I'm not a very bad man, here's some money for you to do this and that.
What are the biggest concerns for those church leaders in terms of how the Ruto government is governing the country?
They are very disappointed in that the Ruto they see is not the Ruto they welcomed, because during the campaign they did welcome him and they received him in a good way. But the 2 years down the line, when things are going haywire, and the people are complaining, the congregants are complaining, and so for the church leaders to be seen to be going against the sentiment of the public is not something that is very encouraging. And it has been seen not just with the churches, but with the politicians themselves are in trouble, because they are being told, you are the ones who did this, you pass laws without understanding them. The picture in the country is that you have a government that is in dissonance with the public, and the shepherds, the spiritual shepherds, don't want to be associated with something that appears to be totally out of tune with reality.
Professor, has the president addressed some of those key issues? We hear the biggest concern of Kenyans is fixing the economy, and also that the healthcare sector is also in shambles and in crisis, and there's a lot of confusion surrounding healthcare.
Well, he has not been able to address the concerns of the people. He is defensive, he tries to be very defensive, and in so doing he still doesn't come out right, because he doesn't explain the mess that he is in, or the country is in. The healthcare services are down the drain. It used to be good, the NHIF used to be to work. Now the new thing does not work, and it doesn't seem what to tell people. The explanations, even his officials don't know how to explain the thing. So he has not come out clean. He is very defensive, and the more defensive he is, the more he alienates people.
That was Macharia Munene, a professor of history and international relations at the U.S. International University in Nairobi, Kenya. The UN Environment Programme says communities living in dry lands are the most affected by global warming, with frequent droughts and subsequent floods rendering traditional livelihoods like farming and livestock keeping nearly impossible. Conservation experts in Kenya are helping such communities develop climate-resilient alternative livelihoods like beekeeping to help them cope with the changing weather patterns. Juma Majanga reports from Garsen, Kenya.
In the scorching afternoon sun in Garsen on the Kenyan coast,
Maurice Kadenge is harvesting honey at his beekeeping farm. Kadenge, a member of the traditionally farming Pokomo community in the Tana River Delta region, says he embraced beekeeping after perennial droughts and flooding affected his farming activities. The father of 9 says the new venture has improved his circumstances.
I feel like it has transformed my life in a big way. It gives me an income which helps in the upkeep of my family. My wife and children eat well, dress well, and the kids go to school.
Kadenge is one of the beneficiaries of the Tana Delta Green Heart Initiative, a project aimed at helping communities affected by climate change develop livelihoods that also promote environmental conservation.
Over hundreds groups.
An East African environmental society, Nature Kenya, is implementing the project in partnership with the Kenyan government and other organizations. Ernest Simeoni is the director of African Beekeepers, which developed the beekeeping initiative for the Delta area.
We are directly involved in managing these beehives. The community, they contribute to the land. They contribute some slight labor, where there's some security. They have to take part in security, making sure that the beehives are not stolen or tampered, and get money.
Nature Kenya says it has so far given out over 50,000 beehives to individual farmers and various groups in the Delta area.
We come in with the community don't have the financial muscle to buy these beehives. So we come in, support them with the beehives, support the capacity that they need.
The UN Environment Programme says Kenya is one of the countries facing increasing effects of climate change, with communities living in arid and semi-arid areas being the most affected. Nature Kenya's Paul Matiku says beekeeping can be a game changer.
One beehive is able to give a farmer over 6,000 shillings annually with only one harvest of honey. That is more than a farmer will get from an acre of maize in the drylands.
Kadenge says he currently produces 500 kilograms of honey from his 60 beehives per harvesting season.
And you can see the honey, clear honey.
With Kenya being a net importer of honey, experts say the arid and semi-arid areas like Tana River offer great potential for honey production that not only give the communities different livelihoods, but help conserve the environment. Juma Majanga, VOA News, Garsen, Kenya.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.